Thanks, Scott. Thank you very much, and welcome all attendees. This is a kind of a new topic, and we hope we leave you with something that you can learn at the end of it. Quickly getting started. A quick introduction to myself. My name is Gayatri. Most people call me Guy, and I head technology at Maarga Systems. I've been in the industry for about 20 years now, and I've been working on multiple platforms, inclusive of IBM collaboration and Java, and these days a lot more on Microsoft, especially the Office 365 and SharePoint Online. That's a quick intro to me. Gopi?
Yeah, thanks, Gayatri. Hey, everyone. My name is Gopi, and I'm currently working as an architect at Maarga Systems. I have over 13 years of experience in Microsoft technologies, and predominantly for the past 6 years, I have been working in different SharePoint environments. That's a quick introduction from me. That 2 over Gayatri.
Thanks, Gopi. So, before we start off, we are building kind of a community of workflow champions and people who are interested in collaboration and building workflow applications. So if you could connect with us on LinkedIn, we would keep you posted, and hopefully we will all have a good community going. Scott, if you can post the link on the chat, people could connect with us on LinkedIn.
Okay, I've posted
Just a very quick, yeah, thanks, Scott. So very, very quick intro to Maarga. Maarga is almost about 13 years old now, and we are a boutique consultancy with customers across Europe and US. Focused a lot on workflow collaboration and digital transformation. From a technology side, we work quite a bit with the IBM stack of collaboration. We work with Office 365 and Microsoft stacks, and of course we use JavaScript frameworks, Java and .NET extensively these days. So what are we going to focus on in today's webinar? It's how to build mobile workflow applications using SharePoint framework. Now, SharePoint framework is pretty new. It, I think, went GA by April of 2017. And it's something that Microsoft promotes pretty heavily as well. So we wanted to, and especially in the world of building mobile applications with responsive UI and things like that, this offers a fairly good toolkit, and we wanted to share our insights about it. So we'll walk you through some introduction to what is SharePoint framework, then how do you set it up. We'll take a business application. We will try to say, how do you start from a starter template, put in the code, and very quickly make something that can be deployed onto the tenant. The target audience that we are covering today, you could be a traditional SharePoint developer and who's interested in understanding what is SPFx all about, or you could be a Lotus loyalist, and because you're starting off on SharePoint, you would rather jump straight into the latest and greatest and what's new and cool. Or you could be someone with capabilities on building front-end applications with HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and you would like to take those skills and bring it onto the SharePoint platform as well. So that is what we are looking at as the target audience. So let's get a quick poll going. What role do you guys play in your organizations? Scott, can you just run the first poll?
Okay, the first poll is up. So what role do you play in your organization? Are you a SharePoint developer, a Lotus Notes developer, or administrator, a technical specialist in Office 365, IT management role, or another role? All right, over 80% of us have already voted. That's great. I'm going to share the results. Everyone has voted. So 33% are SharePoint developers, 25% Lotus Notes developers. Nobody's a technical specialist in Office 365. And then we have IT management role 17%, and other type of role 25%.
Okay. That sounds good. At least, like, our target audience covers more than 50% of today's webinar attendees. So hopefully, like, there's something to take away for every one of you.
Yep, Gayatri, we need to have your screen reshared.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Let's see, it should have switched back. There we go. We see it.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to transfer over to Gopi at this point in time, and he will walk us through the introduction to SharePoint framework as well as setting it up. So, Scott, could you make Gopi the presenter?
Okay, we're switching over to Gopi. Yep, Gopi, you should have a button that popped up for you to go ahead and share your screen. There we go. Gopi, your microphone has been muted. You've got it muted on your side. If you'll just unmute yourself, and then we'll.
Yes, I'm sorry. Hey guys, it is very interesting to see. At least we have about 60% of developers, irrespective of Lotus Notes or SharePoint. I just wanted to go through a few words which I would be using while we go through this webinar, and the words. These would be most commonly used while developing SharePoint client-side SharePoint web parts using SharePoint framework. So the first one, we might be hearing a lot about web parts. So what are these web parts? So for SharePoint developers, it might sound it is pretty much the same as as the web parts what we call in the older versions. But for non-SharePoint developers, I would say web parts are nothing but user controls which are built, packaged, and deployed into SharePoint farm, and the same synonym is now continued as web parts on client side web parts too, and controls which are now rendered using SharePoint framework, which is SPFx, are more client side. And now when we talk about PowerShell, it is a shell program which has been developed by Microsoft for the purpose of task automation and configuration management. And it is basically a command line utility where it follows scripting language. It is based on scripting language with object-oriented programming concepts. And Node.js. And Node.js is an open source and cross-platform JavaScript-based runtime environment. And SharePoint framework exclusively uses this Node.js for to build client-side web parts and also the components. And Yeoman is a template where it is a plugin for which is in use with SharePoint framework. And what basically how Yeoman helps the developer is there are some pre-built templates which have been following best practices, and basically the structure of the template would pretty much remain the same, and it is organized and structured in a proper way. And now when we talk about Gulp. Gulp is more like the compilation and the building tool for generating our web parts. And as developers, we might have heard about the different frameworks which are now available, which are React, Angular, and Knockout, and I'm pretty sure there are some other frameworks which are in primitive stages. But SharePoint supports all the frameworks, and as SharePoint Online is built more on the React framework, a suggestion mostly what we see from Microsoft is building our web parts, building our client-side web parts using React framework. And lastly, coming to packages are nothing but these are where our web parts or the components which are all bundled together, and this is done using the Gulp tool, and they can be deployed in an SPO environment. And when we move to the next slide, yeah, just a minute, guys. So as we move on to the next slide, sorry. Yeah, so as we move on to the next slide, let us talk about the quick introduction to the SharePoint framework. SharePoint framework is a new page and web part model where it helps us in developing client-side web parts using modern technologies. It basically supports the modern technologies, and also also can be built using the open source tools which are present, and it basically runs in the context of the current user. And for SharePoint developers, as an add-ins, we have been seeing iframes a lot, and we don't have to go through the hurdle of handling the authentication and authorization twice on a SharePoint page when an add-in is added. So it basically runs in the context of current user, and it has a great support for all the open source tooling, and also the web parts can be built with different JavaScript frameworks, where React is most commonly used. And I would also like to add a few more points to this, where this web parts can be added to the classic and modern UI pages, and when they are rendered on a normal page, they are accessible and also responsive in nature. And when we on the next slide, what we are predominantly going to be talking about is the prerequisites which are required. And as we set up the SharePoint framework, and before setting up the SharePoint framework, we definitely need to sign up for an Office 365 tenant. And after signing up for an Office 365 tenant level, as a global administrator, you can set up the app catalog site, and the app catalog site is where all the apps would be residing. And this is where you can basically control which apps can be deployed at the site collections, and which apps can be which apps are highly being used, and it is more like an administrative place for monitoring the apps which have been deployed to the SharePoint Online. And also while doing this, we definitely would need a developer site template to be created to test the web parts which we have been developing and building. And before we deploy into the environment, we can definitely use the developer site as a dev environment. And also SharePoint has now provided a workbench concept where it is local, and also you can test your web parts even before deploying them, as we typically do in a SharePoint on-premise environment, where we have to add the WSP solution and install the solution and activate features. Irrespective of all that, you can right away look at the developer functionality from the developer's machine from which you are working on. So let us go to the next slide, which basically talks about setting up the dev environment. So what is needed to set up a dev environment? It is irrespective of platform, and you have different versions for Node.js to be installed on Windows, Ubuntu, Linux, and that would primarily be the framework, the JavaScript runtime environment, where all our web parts can be built. And we also need to install the Yeoman and Gulp, where Yeoman is a plugin where it hosts all the templates for SharePoint and other templates when needed. Gulp is basically the task manager. It is basically like a task manager, where it builds. It also minifies the JSS and the CSS files and bundles them together, and it basically packages them. and we don't have to we don't need another tool to minify our JSS or CSS files for bandwidth maintenance. And as we see now, earlier the SharePoint framework web parts can be built in Visual Studio 2013 and also 2012. But right now, SharePoint framework SPFx web parts can be built in Visual Studio Code, which is an open source and not licensed. And also we can use Atom and WebStorm apart from Visual Studio. And there are also some optional tools which can be installed, like Fiddler, where you can monitor the traffic which flows from the machine to the SharePoint Online through HTTP or the HTTPS protocol. Now going on to the now Scott, can you please go for poll 2?
Okay, I'll start the second poll. So in your organization, what is SharePoint mostly used for? Is it used for custom workflow and web applications? So you can check more than one item. Enterprise content and document management, internet and social network, team sites, or you're not yet using SharePoint. Wow, this is like a horse race. They're all almost identical here. All right, let's give about 3 more seconds here to get a couple more votes in. All right, I will share the results. So 42% are using custom workflow and web applications. 42% are using it for enterprise content and document management. 33% for internet and social network. 50% for team sites. And 42% not using SharePoint yet. Okay, back to you, Gopi.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. It looks like we have a good wide range of users who have been using SharePoint or as a different tool. Now, when we go on, I hope I will switch on to the next slide where we can basically talk about how the installations need to be done for setting up the dev environment. Node.js can be installed from the URL provided on the top of the slide. And when we basically install Node.js, it is pretty much a setup wizard with picking up the default options presented. And once that is done, we can go to the PowerShell command window and just type in npm-v to let us see what version of Node.js has been installed. Please remember that Node.js can be used for even several other, it is more like a standalone runtime environment, and currently SharePoint supports version 3. So we have to just make sure what version of Node.js are we installing. Similarly, when we start using TypeScripts in our SharePoint framework, as of March 2017, SharePoint supports TypeScript 2.2 version. And say for instance, if you are seeing a different version running on your developer machine apart from version 3, there is a specific command in PowerShell. When we execute the command, you can basically install the specific version. Say for instance, it would be something like npm space install space -g, where G stands for globally, and then you specify npm @ the version with which you want to install. So this would basically install the Node.js, and the same way we can install the Yeoman templates, the Gulp engine, and also the Yeoman SharePoint generator. So Yeoman is basically a template, and Yeoman SharePoint generator, it basically creates web parts which are specific to SharePoint, environment. So the installation of Yeoman and Gulp can be done at the same time by having a space between them, as you can see from the first command. So once this command is done, basically there would be a Yeoman Docker utility which runs a sanity check on the system to make sure all the environment variables and all are set at the right path. So once these templates have been installed, the next screen what I'm going to show you is the PowerShell, where we would be receiving where we would basically see like how the structure is organized at the folder level. Say for instance, I would be listing out a couple of commands to just show you like how one web part can be added. We have several tutorials online where we basically see how a web part can be created using one solution. Now I'll try to show you how the same web part, how an additional web part can be added to the same solution, so that multiple web parts can be part of a solution and would definitely help us in utilizing the same framework and would be used more as a reusable components. Okay, so while I do that, let me just run a command which is yo at Microsoft/SharePoint. What this basically does is it provisions and adds another web part to the existing solution. As you can see, as soon as we run the command, we basically get prompted with a welcome screen where we can pick the type of component which we wanted to add. So for this instance, I'm going to pick web part, and as I hit the enter button, it would basically ask me like, what would be my web part name. So I would come up with something very hello world, and I would name it 4, since I do have other web parts which are part of the same solution. So when I do hello world, the next screen would be like, to add a description to my web part, and I can take the default description by hitting enter. And the next prompt is very important, where it asks us what kind of framework do we need for creating our client-side web part. So for this instance, I would pick no JavaScript framework, and what it basically does is it would create a web part, making sure that no JavaScript framework is taken into account. So when I hit enter, we can basically see the commands which are happening would basically allow us to add another existing web part to the solution. This should not take much time, and as soon as this is done, we should also be able to see a congratulations screen, where it basically says the solution has been created, and we have named the web part as hello 4, so would be part of it. So now we have been looking more on the PowerShell side, and now let us take over and have a look at how the structure is been created in the solution by using the Visual Studio Code. Beauty of the PowerShell and how it is how these are all integrated is I don't have to navigate to the folder path to find my solution. Once a web part is provisioned, all I do is I do a code space dot, and it instantly brings up the Visual Studio Code editor, and it will populate all the hierarchical structure which is needed for that solution. As you guys can see, I have several web parts over here, and the one whatever I have created is named as was named as Hello4. And when we look at this, these are all created by default, like the TypeScript and the .scss file, and also the manifest.json, where it basically says more about the web part. And it also creates an interface where the class over here extends, and it takes into all those properties into accounts. .scse is basically a TypeScript cascading style sheet, and when we do the gulp command, it basically converts all this CSS. It basically converts this .scss files into CSS files, and it minifies and bundles all of the files together. Now, as we have brought up the screen, I would like to do a gulp serve, like to build the web part whatever we have developed, to see how it looks on my local machine and also on the tenant level. In order to do that, all I have to do is I have to do a gulp serve, gulp space serve, and this would basically compile and build my project. And it basically invokes the default browser window, and it shows up like what are all the web parts which are present. As you can see here, it opened my default browser window, and there is a workbench which is provided on the local host, and this can be more useful as what I would say is like to look at the web parts user interface and how the performance looks. Say for instance, so this was the web part which I have created during our presentation. So when I add this web part, you can basically see like there are some features where these are built by default, and the more framework how it is all organized, Gayatri will explain us. And I would just restrict to the workbench part to just let you guys see like how this web part has been rendered onto the browser. So, and there is another beautiful thing which I really like, where you can identify the environment in which you are working, and you can mock up data. Say for instance, I'm working on a local instance, and under local instance I don't have access to my SharePoint environment. In such a scenario, I can basically mock up the data, and after identifying that I'm working on the local environment, I can populate the data from my mockup from the mocked up data which is present within the same solution. And the same web part, when added to at a tenant level, it basically appears under 15 high folder, and there is also a workbench associated on this page. So this is more a developer side collection, which is a prerequisite, as I have told you guys. And this is the place where I can add the same web part again to see how the web part is functioning while communicating to the SharePoint list, and to make sure. And remember one thing, these same web parts will be available to any tenant which you have access. Say for instance, I have been accessing this web part from my developer machine for the Maarga systems tenant, and say for instance, if I am part of Microsoft tenant, the same web part can be viewed on that specific screen where it would be like Microsoft tenant.sharepoint.com sites. And so basically you don't have to deploy, you don't have to install this, add the solution to the solution store, you don't have to install, and you don't have to retract, and you don't have to do none of those stuff as a SharePoint developer now. And all of the development whatever you guys would be doing can be washed over from the developer's machine. So this is pretty exciting, and I would definitely say a huge step in terms of development of SharePoint client-side web parts. And that is from me, and I would let Gayatri to take over, the business application which we have built using SharePoint framework. Hey Gayatri, over to you.
Sure, I'll take over now. Okay, so before we go on, I'm just going to run over. I'll do a quick poll because we've been talking quite some time, and I would like to get a sense of what challenges typically, you guys face when you're doing your SharePoint development. Scott, can you just run the third poll, please?
Okay, so our third and final poll is, what challenges do you face in SharePoint development? So again, you can select more than one. So it's lack of skilled resources, UI and UX front-end design issues, or lack of design and architects level expertise, maintenance and support issues, or lack of requirements clarity. I'm sure that one's going to be picked by everyone.
That's a common one.
Yeah, I would think so, but actually, maybe for this group, it's probably just a fact that people maybe, making the transition from Notes over to SharePoint, they may not know what they can do, so maybe the requirements maybe not as high. We'll see. Okay, so we've got just about 70% of us have voted, so let's get 3 or 4 more votes in. Get the last second votes in here. We don't want to spend too much time on the polls, but it does give us an idea of where you're at compared to others and your peers. So, all right, I'm going to share the results. This is going to be interesting. So 50% say lack of skilled resources an issue. UI is 21%. Design and architectural level expertise is 43%. Maintenance and support issues at 21%, and lack of clarity for requirements is 36%.
Okay, that's interesting. I was expecting more on, a little bit more on UI UX as well as clarity, but interesting results that are coming up. Okay, let's move on a little bit. Maybe some of our webinars can also help in terms of increasing capability around. What we are going to do right now is part of what we decided as a takeaway, right? Let's pick up a business application, which is a very simple application, representative, so to speak. It's a business card request. I'm sure a lot of you must have faced this, raise a request for business cards, and somewhere in the walls of the organization, the administration team, the office admin team will get it printed at some point in time. It will land up on your desk. So it's a simple initiator creates a request, fills in whatever the data that he needs to. A manager could approve or reject this request and say, no, you cannot have business cards. And then if he approves, then the administrator and an office admin takes action on it to say, yes, I've actually ordered it, and then this is completed, I've actually delivered it across to you. And let's see how we actually build this with SharePoint Framework. What we are going to do today is, let's look at what do you do or where do you go and create the form. How do you add the functionality to go and submit it, and so that it actually fills out an item in SharePoint? How do you deploy this to a tenant and make it all work? So I'm going to switch over and let's look at the code. Now, Gopi did show you how when you created a template, you had a set of TypeScript files get created. You had also some of the style sheets got created. So we're going to look at this specific TypeScript file and see what do I have to do? Where do I have to go and make changes to make this particular form work? Now, if you look at your default, all this part would be available ahead of time. So it would be created by on itself. Your imports, your styles will get imported, and anything other that needs to be involved in this particular application gets imported, and you would really see that this public render void up to inner HTML is there. So it's pretty much inside this that you're going to make changes. Now, your style sheets that are default gives you responsiveness. So it's pre-built. So as long as you're sticking to those controls and use those controls, you would be able to build an application that's pretty quick. So let's go and add, in this particular case, we've added a set of fields. Standard HTML, nothing complex about it. All we are doing is you're picking up the style and you're saying this is a form control, setting up your label, the IDs and the data that you wanted. And of course, this can be enhanced any number of times. You can add additional functionality into it, but pretty much you can create a form very quickly. And you can be sure, because you're using the default controls, that it's going to come with certain functionality ahead of time. Now, if I have this form, how do I make sure that it is going to be connecting to the right list? Now, we did see that I could have many number of web paths, and then I could add any of them into my SharePoint tenant, but how do I make sure that data from this connects to the right SharePoint list? So what I'm going to do, and I don't want to hard code it, I don't want to kind of make it as part of my application itself. So what I do is add it as a property. And one of the things that you do is to create a property, and here you can see that we've added a property called list name. So anytime this web part gets added into your application, what you are going to do is set up which list you want to connect this to. So now you have the form, you have entered your fields into your HTML form, you have said this is the list you want it to be connected to. Where do you write the code? Right? In this particular case, we've created a controller and a data service, two type scripts. Pretty straightforward here. And let's create a create item. It's just a method that wherein you're collecting the data, you're collecting the values from all the form elements that you have, and then calling the appropriate data request method. Right? Again, standard JavaScript, nothing complex about it. So let's look at the data service, which is where the actual work gets done, right? Now here, if you look at the create item, that specifically you need to look at three things. One, this is your create item method where you're passing all the parameters. If you look here, you need the method, you need the REST API call. Again, SharePoint developers will probably know this is kind of standard REST API calls they are probably used to earlier. Now, if you are a Lotus developer, what you're doing here is you have the front end, which is making an AJAX request. Imagine like this is equivalent of calling your agent in your Notes application and passing it the parameters that you need. So that's what you're doing here. You're constructing the URL. And remember, here is where you're using the list name, which is a property, as opposed to hard-coded list name. And then you're sending it the data as a standardized JSON. So pretty much with a simple set of code, you've created a code for submitting your request. Let's see how this actually will work. Now, for this to work on your SharePoint tenant, you need to package this, right? So you use, as Gopi was saying, gulp is what is used to package something. So you run the command called gulp space package dash solution. So it's a simple gulp space package solution, which gives you, minifies all of this, constructs a complete package. Now then what you do is to go into your SharePoint tenant, and this is the standard catalog and where you can upload. You could upload your package and you can select the specific package name, and once you're uploaded, this web part is now ready for use consumption in your sites. Let's go in and see where it's been included, right? So it's been added right here. So there is a workbench, and we've included this particular site. And let me kind of show you here. And here is where you're linking. This is the property that we talked about. Here is where you're saying that you want this particular vCard request to be linked to this particular list. Now, pretty straightforward, and you can see this in mobile view. This is what we said. It's default, and you can see it in a tablet view, and by default, it's going to be responsive. Let's fill out a form. I'm just going to add mine. Okay, Ganesh at Maarga Systems. Let's add his designation, SME, and then phone number, and wants to have 100 cards, and then I submit the request. So once this request is submitted, what you would see is that it actually adds it as an item into the list. And this was the list that we had talked about, the vCard request, and this particular request has been added as a list item. Now what happens now is this particular item is ready for actions. So how am I going to set up my workflow? What am I going to do? The easiest way is to use flow. And here is the simple flow that we've created. So when a new item is created, now send an email to the requester as well as the approver. Start an approval process with the manager where you say you could either approve or reject. And if it's approved, send it across to the administrator for action. Or if it's not approved, then respond back and say, hey, this person is not approved it. And let's see a quick approval that has happened. Now, if you look at it, Flow automatically creates an approval request, and right on your approval request, it's an email that you get, you are able to approve or reject this particular request. And with very few steps, suddenly you have a responsive mobile application that's ready. And the advantage is now you could share this particular request form across for multiple other situations as well. And you can include it in other sites, and you could connect it with, all you have to do is just connect it with the appropriate list, and you know that this request will be saved. Okay, now that we have taken a quick look at how we build the application and how we have kind of created a responsive mobile application, I would like to get a quick feedback from you guys about what you have learned at this point in time. Scott, could you just post this feedback link into the chat so that we can get some responses?
Okay, so in your chat window is a link, a short link to a quick little survey. So if you want to click on that, then you could give some quick feedback about some of these items she's talking about, and then she can then carry on from there. But it is in the chat window, so if you open up your GoToWebinar control panel and look for the chat area, if you expand that, you will see the link. It's https://goo.gl. So that's the link you're looking for.
I will just wait for a minute and then we'll continue on.
Yeah, so hopefully you're clicking on your mouse and doing this quick little survey. So this will be good. It's kind of an interactive type of survey that gives some immediate feedback to Gayatri. So we'd appreciate your feedback. And I do see some questions coming in, so keep the questions coming in, and we will have those queued up. They're being queued up and ready for the question and answer section of the webinar.
Great.
We do appreciate that as well. And this is a time to get information that these experts will have.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. So hopefully, we covered the basics of how do you set up a SharePoint framework, how do you start off with the starter template, and then how do you actually build an application pretty quickly. What we did was nothing complex in terms of the application functionality. Once you know how to structure this and continue, then it's the sky's the limit. You could build anything, and especially, as Gopi said, you can build reusable components. When you look at the workflow applications, right, typically you would see an audit control or an audit trail will be you will use it in many, many applications. You can build that as a standard component that can be included in many different places. Another typical control you would see is the requester panel. I mean, you would typically see, who's the requester, the requester name, their email ID, possibly some information from the or their Office 365 account or something like that, and that may be made into a reusable control as well. Or if you would want to build a visual workflow tracker, for example, to say, this is where my workflow is at this point in time, and you could build that again as a reusable control, which can then take in specific status from different parts. And you saw how you can have a property pane that fills in data so that it can become very dynamic in nature. So we open you up for questions at this point in time. So Gopi or I or Ganesh would be happy to share answers that we know. If you don't know, we'll get back to you. So Scott, if there are already questions, you could probably read them out.
Yes, there are questions already. So first question is the SharePoint framework supported in SharePoint Online only, or is it available in an on-premise environment also?
Yes, hey, this is Gopi. I would like to answer that. SharePoint framework is also available for on-prem versions, but only with versions 2016 and when feature pack 2 is applied. So for the older versions, no, but SharePoint framework supports for on-prem 2016, which has feature pack 2 applied.
Okay, perfect. All right, next question, and thank you, Robin, for that question. This question is from Ben. Ben, welcome. Thank you for the question. As for the approval workflow, where does the manager value come from? Is it something you define in the app or something taken from the Office 365 account?
Okay, I'll answer that. See, because we've set up the workflow through Flow, and for that matter, you could also set it up as SharePoint Designer workflow. It takes it from the Office 365 account. You can configure it the way there and say, I want it to go to this person's manager as defined in Office 365. It's not absolutely necessary that you have to do it that way. You could pick it up from a configuration, or if you want, you could pick it up hard-coded, which I wouldn't recommend, but all of these are available.
Okay, perfect. All right, so you must have explained everything perfectly. So far that's the only two questions that we have, and we are, we're getting to 50 minutes, so this has been pretty good. But if anyone does have a last-minute question, now's the time to type it in, and we can ask that right away. All right, so I think we're out of questions.
Great, then we gave back 10 minutes of time for people.
Yep, so they can now they can have lunch. So
lunch is served.
Yeah, perfect. All right. So great. Well, Gayatri and Gopi, thank you very much. And again, just a reminder to everyone, we did record this so that you can reference back to it, or you can share it with other colleagues. And then based on your polls and some feedback, then this will help Maarga Systems work on the next webinar, maybe to increase your understanding of SharePoint and what else you can be doing with it, especially as they have a common background with Notes and now SharePoint. So definitely they will be pointing you in the right direction. Okay, so Gayatri and Gopi, I'll give the last word to you, and then we'll end the webinar.
Wait, Scott, I'll take the last word. So one of the things that we are most excited about, especially with what's happening in the world of SharePoint, is the fact that it's becoming more and more open, which it was not until pretty recently. And because it's getting open, especially coming from the world of the Lotus background, we find we are able to bring some of the capabilities that we already had and apply it onto what is new. And our ongoing series of webinars and blogs and things like that are towards that, to kind of not only help SharePoint, traditional SharePoint developers and people to engage with the newer SharePoint online, but also help Lotus loyalists, people who have been in the Lotus world for quite some time, to engage with this new technology as well and bring some of their skills over onto this. And in that, SharePoint framework plays a pretty big part. So one of the future webinars is likely to work a lot more on the React framework, because that's specialized by Microsoft, and we look forward to having you all there as well. Thank you very much for attending today, and hope you had a good time.
Okay, thank you. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.